In today's video, we preview Sword Weirdos, the much anticipated zine format fantasy skirmish rules from Garske Games. Hi everybody, my name is Lee and welcome to the Old Hammered YouTube channel, where we talk a lot about retro minis, indie games, and random wargaming ephemera. So today I am chuffed to report that I have been blessed with the playtest rules for Sword Weirdos, the upcoming fantasy skirmish game written by Garske, who you may know as the author of Space Weirdos, the cult classic sci-fi skirmish game. We posted a couple of Space Weirdos bat reps on the channel last year, so definitely check those out if you're interested. Space Weirdos is a fan favorite of our local gaming group. The rules only cost $5, and they work with virtually any sci-fi figures you have, so it is a very economical way to get your favorite old minis back on the table or introduce new players to the hobby. After the release of Space Weirdos, many fans, including myself, have been clamoring for a fantasy version of the game, which author KCG has kindly delivered. I'm not certain what the official release date for Sword Weirdos is, but the game is definitely in the home stretch, so it's probably just a matter of weeks. I will post a couple of relevant links in the video description where you can go to get more info. So at first glance, it appears that Sword Weirdos uses the same basic game engine as Space Weirdos with a few minor adjustments. For example, the shooting and prowess attributes used in Space Weirdos have been combined into a single attribute called Might, which in Sword Weirdos represents both shooting and melee proficiency. Also, Space Weirdos command points have been replaced with maneuver points, which I'll talk about shortly. Despite the small changes, if you've already played Space Weirdos, then many of the Sword Weirdos gameplay mechanics, such as actions, movement sticks, combat effects charts, use of die types, etc., will seem comfortably familiar. However, Sword Weirdos adds several layers of tasty bacon on top of those core rules, with new additions like character classes, weapon properties, magic spells, special maneuvers, and other fun stuff. This new material is what allows you to create custom Warband characters, that's what I'm calling them, that mimic the classic archetypes from your favorite fantasy novels and RPGs. Do you want to field a barbarian with a two-handed axe? You can do that. A swashbuckler with a saber and pistol? You can do that too. A druid with a wolf companion? Yep. Fireball casting wizard? You bet. Knife-wielding assassin? Most definitely. So basically, if you and your pals have a bunch of old RPG figs stashed in a storage case somewhere, you can resurrect them, so to speak, with Sword Weirdos and get them back on the tabletop for more adventures. Just choose your favorite minis, use the Warband building rules to create stats that fit each model, being as WYSIWYG as possible, and then pitch your teams against each other in classic fantasy skirmishes, Mordheim-style treasure grabs, or even player versus player dungeon crawls. I don't see any solo rules in the playtest document I have, but if I were to speculate, I suspect there will be a solo version of Sword Weirdos somewhere down the line, or you could just modify the existing Space Weirdos solo rules or homebrew your own. It wouldn't be that difficult. Okay, let's take a look at some Sword Weirdos basics. Please keep in mind this is just my takeaway based on skimming the playtest rules, so your actual mileage may vary. As with Space Weirdos, Sword Weirdos is a low model count game, requiring just 3 to 10 models per side, give or take. In lieu of rulers, you'll need a couple of 5-inch measuring sticks with a line to mark the midway point on each. The first sticks we made were just trimmed crafting sticks, or coffee stirrers or popsicle sticks or whatever. But then Lynn discovered that our local library has a free maker studio, so she's been cutting fancier ones out of acrylic, so go Lynn. As in Space Weirdos, Sword Weirdos uses standard RPG dice, D4s through D12s. Each model in your Sword Weirdos warband will have 4 attributes: speed, defense, might, and willpower, with the last 3 being represented by one of 3 die types, either 2d6, 2d8, or 2d10. These are the dice you roll to attack, defend, cast a spell, etc. Although certain buffs or nerfs can move your die types lower or higher, depending on the situation, you can never go lower than 2d4 or higher than 2d12. Keep in mind, though, that you pay points for every attribute, and they get more expensive the higher they get. So if you try to maximize your stats, you will not be able to field that many characters. And I believe there's a point cap of 25 points per model anyway, so you can't create any super soldiers on the battlefield. Sword Weirdos can easily be played on a 2x2 to 2x3 area, so really all you need is a kitchen table or a card table. We have played small games of Space Weirdos using a 22x30 kill team mat on a folding Texas Hold'em table, and that works great. Sword Weirdos recommends using plenty of terrain to break up line of sight, but if you don't have any, just raid the pantry or the recycling bin for suitable cans or boxes. You just want to avoid having any long straight channels on your battlefield that would allow archers to fire long distances. You'll also need a few tokens for marking various gameplay conditions. We bought these wooden dots from Chessex. But hey, buttons, coins, or paper chits will work just as well, as will small dice. As I said, your Sword Weirdos Warband is going to have 3 to 10 models, give or take, one of which will be the leader. Your leader is especially important because if he or she gets knocked out of action, your warband might become broken at the end of the turn. Broken warbands receive an initiative roll penalty for the rest of the game, which is a total drag. To make your warbands more thematic, you and your opponent may agree to give each leader in each warband a specific trait. Leader traits include things like Enchanted Weapon, Enchanted Shield, Mage Killer, Monstrous, Sorcerer, and Tactician, and every leader trait confers certain benefits. Warband traits include options like Adventuring Party, Forces of Chaos, Monster Squad, Small Folk, Soldiers, Thieves Guild, Tribal, Undead, and Witch Hunters. Each of these traits offers the party certain buffs, though you may have to choose your individual character classes and weapon selections very carefully to take advantage of them, and I'll explain that shortly. Next, you need to assign a character class to each of your models, which will give it certain buffs and nerfs, determine what weapons it can use, and in some cases will put a cap on its base attributes. A wretch, for example, can't have a defense, might, or will higher than 2d6, can only use simple or ranged weapons, but gets a +2 when fighting with clubs, articulated clubs, fists, torches, and pitchforks. So if you want to field an angry mob, buy a bunch of wretches. A berserker, on the other hand, gets -1 to his defense rolls, which is kind of a nerf, but a second staggered condition does not take him out of action like normal mortals. A berserker can use simple weapons, martial weapons, and/or a shield. Magic users can purchase spells and use magical knickknacks like scrolls, orbs, and wands. And hunters can use ranged weapons and simple weapons, and when shooting, the target gets no cover bonus, plus hunters are not penalized by shooting on the run, which is very handy, so they can run and gun. All in all, there are 27 different classes to choose from, including assassins, barbarians, fighters, healers, martial artists, magical beasts, pit fighters, and thieves. Some classes are rare, so you can only have 1 or 2 of them in your warband, and leaders get to join 2 classes because they're special. Okay, so at this point, let's say we've selected our models, we've chosen a leader trait and a warband trait, and assigned a class to each of our characters. The next step is to purchase weapons for everybody, keeping in mind the limitations for each class. So here's where things get really interesting. The overall weapons list has over 50 options, including separate lists for martial weapons, simple weapons, ranged weapons, shields, natural weapons, and magical knickknacks. Many of the weapons have both a property, which is sort of a passive trait, and a maneuver, which is a special power that you have to spend a maneuver point to use and can only activate under certain conditions. We'll talk about maneuver points here in a minute, but basically you get 2 to 4 of them to spend each turn, depending on the size of the game, and any unused maneuver points don't roll over to subsequent turns. Now all these classes, properties, and maneuvers may sound complicated right now, but since you're only dealing with a handful of models, and you can write their abilities down on a character sheet, it's really going to be pretty easy once you get the hang of it. The result of all this customization is that each model in your warband is essentially a character, at least that's what I'm calling them, who not only has a character class, but also 1 or more weapons, each with its own unique properties and/or maneuvers. And that makes each model in your warband feel more like a unique individual and less like a generic soldier with a hand weapon. The real fun, as I see it, is going to be carefully navigating your characters into just the right situation where you can unleash their special powers at a critical point and wreak havoc. Okay, now let's look at some sample characters and see how everything kind of ties together. So let's say we have this armored dwarf right here, Morgan the Masher. He's part of a warband that has the deep Dweller trait. So all these guys have the Deep Dweller trait, which will give them +1 when attacking with hammers and picks. Also, they are not affected by darkness, so they are all very useful in dungeon crawls. A hammer is a martial weapon, not a simple weapon like a club, dagger, or pitchfork. So when we choose Morgan's class, we'll want to make sure he can use martial weapons. So let's make him a fighter, which gives him an additional +1 to his might rolls when he's attacking, but also lets him buy a hammer from the martial weapons list. So now he gets a +2 in melee. Woohoo! In addition, Morgan's hammer has the crushing property, which is automatic, and the smash maneuver, which he can use if his warband opts to spend a maneuver point to do so. The hammer's crushing property means that Morgan can spend 2 actions on his melee attack to give the defender a -1 on the defense roll, or 3 actions on the attack to give them a -2. Smash means he upgrades his attack dice by 1 die type. So Morgan could theoretically spend 3 actions and 1 maneuver point to deliver 1 supercharged hammer blow in combat. On top of that, because he's wielding a massive 2-handed hammer, he could theoretically purchase a might stat of 2d10, which is the maximum, and I'll talk a little bit more about purchasing stats here in a bit. Now let's give our Deep Dweller Warband a wizard, and let's call him Rosy Quartz, right there. Rosy's class is Magic User, which means he can purchase spells and also purchase magical artifacts from the weapons chart. He cannot, however, use a hammer or a pick, so the Deep Dweller Warband trait doesn't benefit him as much as it does Morgan the Masher. With WYSIWYG in mind, we're going to purchase Rosy a Wizard Staff, which has the properties Defensive and Light. Defensive means he'll receive a +1 on defense rolls and a -1 on might rolls. Light means the staff provides illumination, which isn't that great since Rosy's not affected by dark anyway, but would certainly be useful if any friendly surface folk are joining him on dungeon crawls. The staff also has the Magic Shield maneuver, which means if someone's shooting at him, Rosy can spend a maneuver point to defend with his willpower stat instead of his defense, and since wizards need a lot of willpower for spellcasting anyway, this might be helpful. And speaking of spells, we'll spend a few points to arm Rosy with Lightning Bolt and Fireball, giving him some potent area of effect offensive magic. Now let's make another brawler for the Warband. This here is Billy the Hook, and as you can see, he has a hammer in one hand and a hook in the other, or rather in place of the other. We'll make Billy a Barbarian, which gives him +1 to his will rolls, and if he ends movement within 1/2 stick of an enemy, he can still move into base-to-base contact if he wants to. Presumably that means leaping into combat. Barbarians can use hammers, so Bill will benefit from all the hammer benefits that his pal Morgan gets, with the exception that, because he's using the hammer in one hand instead of 2, he won't be able to purchase 2d10 worth of might. To offset this though, Bill has a weapon in his offhand, a pointy hook, and for the purposes of the game, let's say it represents a parrying dagger. If he chooses to, Bill can attack with both his weapons in combat by spending 1 action each, though I believe the second attack is at -1 die type. Parrying daggers are weak, so Bill will roll a max of 2d6 when attacking with his hook. However, parrying daggers have 2 maneuvers Bill can use: parry, which adds +1 to Bill's defense roll when he's attacked, and weak spot, which adds +1 to his melee attack result after a successful hit. However, Bill will have to spend a precious maneuver point to activate either of those powers. At this point, you can probably start to see how spending maneuver points to activate abilities at critical moments could give your characters an edge. However, since you only get between 2 to 4 maneuver points per turn, depending on the size of the game, you'll need to spend them wisely. On a side note, instead of maneuver points, Space Weirdos uses command points, which you can spend on things like Power Up, Dodge, First Strike, and Overwatch. Dodge and Overwatch are quite useful in Space Weirdos, but they don't exist in Sword Weirdos, probably because there's less emphasis on shooting. After you've selected miniatures for your Sword Weirdos Warband, given each model a class, and then purchased its weapons, it's time to buy some stats, which again are speed, defense, might, and willpower. The speed attribute ranges from 1 to 3 and indicates how many of a model's actions it can spend on movement during its activation. Models with a speed of 1 can only move 1 stick. Models with a speed of 3, on the other hand, can spend all 3 of their actions to move and run up to 3 sticks if they want to. The other attributes, namely defense, might, and willpower, are going to range from 2d6 to 2d10, and the higher a model's stats, the more expensive they're going to be. A defense of 2d6, for example, will cost you 2 points, while a defense of 2d10 will cost you 8 points, plus your model has to have a shield, which sets you back an additional point. Also, characters with shields can't wield two-handed weapons or carry a weapon in their offhand. So maximizing either your might or defense in Sword Weirdos does come with some trade-offs. I'm not going to delve into the Sword Weirdos combat mechanics today because, frankly, they're not that much different than the Space Weirdos combat mechanics. But basically, if a model activates and it is in base-to-base contact with another model, or if it moves into base-to-base with another model, it can use an action to attack if it has one. If it has 2 weapons, it can spend 1 action per weapon and make 2 attacks, assuming it has 2 actions left, though every attack after the first is done so at -1 die type. The attacker can get buffs for charging and ganging up, and the target gets nerfs for being down and or staggered, but basically the attacker rolls his or her might, the defender rolls defense. In this case, the attack roll is less than the defense roll, so the attack missed, but if it was the other way around, if this was the attack and this was the defense, it'd be a 15 to a 10. Which is enough to hit the target, but not enough to give the attacker any bonus on the melee result roll. But he rolls 2d6 to see what happens. He gets a 9. Down and staggered, so his opponent is down and staggered. On his next activation, he will need to spend an action to try to become unstaggered. And if he's successful, he can spend another action and stand up. Being down and staggered is not a place anyone wants to be. Okay, folks, those are a few highlights from Sword Weirdos, the upcoming fantasy skirmish heartbreaker from Garske Games. If you're looking for a compact, economical rule set that packs the same punch as denser, more expensive games, this very well might fit the bill. I will have a better sense after we play a few scenarios, but right now I'm feeling pretty optimistic about Weirdos of the Sword. With that in mind, I hope you will join us for our upcoming Sword Weirdos gameplay videos. The bat reps are a lot of work to produce, but we'll try to turn them around as quickly as we can. In the meantime, start dusting off those old RPG figs because the highly anticipated Sword Weirdos, the upcoming rulebook zine, is almost upon us. I guess that's a wrap for today. As always, thanks very much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.